feel like everybody's right and everybody's wrong.
100%. Why is this important? Why are we even going here? He's helped a lot of guys. He's also not had success with a lot of guys.
Come in with a purpose, and they're very intentional with what they do and how they do it.
From the majors to the sandlot, baseball and softball share space in one place. Welcome to the farm system.
Fellas, and the ladies, welcome back to another episode of The Farm. Look, Tay, it's actually interesting. I get to lick straight on with you.
I know, yeah.
We can actually have a conversation. I think Happy New Year off the jump. Hope you guys had a great Christmas. I know it's been a couple weeks since we got one out to you guys too. So definitely interested to jump back in. Tay, we just keep getting into the I've been on a roll lately of getting into some of the underlying stuff that I think is really helping some people, and we've got some good feedback. And also too, I know this time of the year, I just really wanted to focus with that. I mean, obviously from your field, just in general of you just knowing that space so well with this time in the year and some things that people deal with. And obviously, again, you just, personally in-house, like we've had a bunch of loss and some things that have happened of recent as well. Just even last night that someone that I grew up playing high school baseball against, and someone that you knew also really well, family friend, all those things, he also just passed away too as well. So motorcycle accidents, it's crazy. It's a wild time. And anyway, so today, one of the things I had on my heart from yesterday, and I really wanted to talk with you about it because I think it's a thing that is can lead to a lot of other things, and it's a kind of an underlying issue, is how we process disappointment. And so I think that is a thing that, we could all relate with as human beings, that we all are going to be disappointed, and there's going to be things that happen throughout our lives. And I think that is there's a lot of ways to process disappointment. Obviously, there's some things that are individualized based on what is happening, but also too, I really thought that at this point of the year, especially before walking into season for a lot of coaches as well, what we do, we're all going to be disappointed, but obviously how we respond and how we process it is really a game changer individually. So that's what I wanted to talk through today, and maybe give them some resources, and also talk through some different modalities or tools they can use within their mindset there, and some things that could really help.
Yeah, no, awesome. Well, having had the time to think about this a lot since we kind of talked about it last night, the one thing that was a reoccurring theme in my head when I thought about disappointment and different disappointments that I myself have experienced is disappointment holds hands with expectation.
Yep.
Right? We set an expectation for ourselves, for a team, for a role of some kind. And when that expectation is not met, that's when we are disappointed. Now, the underlying question now, how do we process that? Now, I think there's 100 different ways you can process different things in different situations. Ultimately, I think it comes back to what is the actual disappointment in this scenario, right? What are you actually disappointed about? Because a lot of times when we're looking inward, is it that, if there's deeper awareness there, did we give 100%? Did I actually give this my best? Or was this completely uncontrollable? Well, there are no controllable variables, and kind of really like dissect actually what we're disappointed about and then go from there.
Yeah, no, I think it's a big piece of, I always say, like, what's really the problem? Because I think more often than not, we go around trying to clean up all these symptoms that we have of foundational issues that we have within belief systems, what we're basing kind of like all of our awareness off of. And I think also with that is like, just like you said of, well, again, for example, like when I'm disappointed about something, like let's say I'm disappointed with how somebody responded, right? Like maybe you're coaching a player, and you had really good intentions, you wanted to help them with X, Y, and Z, and how they responded was not that way. Okay, now let's say that's coaching, great. Well, how about like how your, maybe again like your husband, right? How your wife responds to you, right? Like you're disappointed with maybe it was Christmas, right? You got this, you thought it was the perfect gift, yada yada yada. Okay, right? And while these are service level examples, what I mean by that though is that they're all rooted back, even though that seems so surface level, that again, our expectation of what we need from other people actually goes much deeper. And so like I kind of want to unpack that, because I think we run past those going, well, you know, it's actually pretty cut and dry, right? Like I got this, she didn't appreciate it, blah 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 blah, or I said that, you know, we set up this whole, you know, all the things we do for our players, and we get up and we have 4 a.m. lifts and all these other things, and they don't appreciate it. Okay, and then also too, man, I really thought that this was going to be the year, and it turned out to not be the year, or you know, you're going into winter break and you're a coach and you're going, man, I really thought that this year was going to be your year, and then we had all these guys that transferred at break, and we had all these injuries and all these things happen, and how I deal with that, or maybe again you recruited a whole bunch of players, right, that you thought were going to come in and do something, and maybe again, like with that, they're either not performing at the level that they were, or maybe you had a coach that ended up leaving mid-season or something like that. Sometimes again, along with that there's disappointment can show up in all faces and all express itself in all different ways. But when you dig down underneath that, there's a big difference, I feel like, with when you come into expectation of needing something to go the way that you wanted it to go, right, or needed it to go, and then asking yourself those deeper questions of like, well, why did I need that outcome, right? Why does that outcome shake me so much? Why is there, you know, my expectation of how, you know, how much gratitude they should have had, or how much appreciation they should have had, or, you know, why did I need this season, you know, to be X, Y, and Z? And I think a long times with that is that we just think that it's a surface level conversation of, well, you know, I just want to win. Well, yeah, but why do you need to win?
Right. Well, and I think we confuse the need versus want.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's a big desire of mine, but I don't actually need it.
Yeah.
There's a difference there between needs and wants. And I think that's where our extremist personalities can overflow a lot, where, you know, we have a lot of extreme athletes. Oh, I need this to be my season. I need this to be my play. I need this to be, you know, whatever. And in actuality, you don't need it, but you want it, and it would be nice, and it would be a bonus to all your hard work, right? And I think the uncontrollables there is everything else around us, right? Because in reality, in real life, we can only control ourselves. We can't control every single outcome that happens outside of us.
Well, and you get into it, there's somebody on the other side of the field that also
has all those same needs.
Yes.
That also has all those same wants.
Or wanted to be the starter, or wanted to be those X, Y, and Z there, right? And then also as a coach, I think another thing you could take from this conversation that we're going to go into as well is like, how are you helping your players process disappointment? Because you guys all know as coaches, right? Okay, the fall has been awesome, right? Because you have the 2 split teams. You guys have been battling each other, inter-squatting, X, Y, and Z. That's all awesome. But now you're about to have a starting lineup, right?
Right.
And then a whole bunch of these players, there's a good group of these players. You're going to have your, you know, 5 to, you know, however many players. They're going to be sitting in the back of the dugout that are upset that they're not playing. And then now, you know, we're trying to force them on the fence. And then we're trying to, you know, again, I feel like this is like behavior modification when it comes into culture, right? That you're trying to, you know, facilitate that. It's like, hey, pick up your teammates. Here's all these charts. Here's all these ways you can contribute. But the problem is you're not getting to the root of the issue, which is more so like their heart condition, and also to their foundation of how they're viewing being on a team, and how they're viewing contribution, and what that actually looks like. Because in their head, they're supposed to, the way that they're going to contribute is they're going to be playing. Right. And now that they're not playing, well, that's their purpose, right? So you just strip their purpose away from them. And so now they're doing this spiral. And I think more often than not, you know, coaches can slide into this place of being like, well, he just needs to get tougher, or he just needs to do these X, Y, and Z. When in reality, the same thing too. It's like, I think we need to be careful, because very easily, again, we can lose track of, hey, you're the coach and you have a position here and you're on the starting team. And again, if you were somewhere and just playing, you know, let's say a supportive role, you know, I've seen it time and time again where coaches struggle with the same things. And so I think a lot of times in that area, it can be almost like the blind leading the blind of like, you have problems processing disappointment, and we all do. There's levels to this. This isn't a check mark again, right? We all struggle with these things, but there's levels of how we can get better at doing so. And also we can be more intentional about it. And I think that that's a bigger piece that, again, if you get better at processing disappointment, you can also help your players get better at processing disappointment, which then leads into a better culture and also gives you what you truly want in the first place, which is a cohesive team that really is working together towards one common goal, right? So I think this is like a big conversation in that same way, is like talking through some of those things and also bringing awareness to some of the deeper levels that we're actually dealing with, rather than really just coining it off as a superficial or high level conversation of, you know, maybe just mental toughness or, you know, this he just needs to be tougher, more gritty, all these other things, when what we just get stuck at that part of the conversation and we don't actually talk about the prerequisites or the work that is done to actually have it. Might express itself as grit, but there's a lot that goes in to making someone like that, and also too that they can contribute in that own way. Because also, again, before I toss back to you too, is that my same mindset is like, I've seen a lot of kids be really gritty when they're playing. When they're sitting the bench, they're no longer gritty. Right. I've seen a lot of kids play very gritty when everything's going okay at home and they can grind and they can do their things and X, Y, and Z. But then, you know, again, like, let's say, you know, maybe over Christmas break, their, you know, cousin, you know, passed away, or maybe over Christmas break they broke up with their girlfriend, or maybe over, you know, whatever that is, right? Some things are going to happen throughout season, disappointments, setbacks, all those other things. And if we don't develop those skill sets, it's a skill set, right? And there's some prerequisites in there of a foundational understanding with those things, that it's a lot deeper than I feel like a lot of people coin it up to be.
Yeah, well, and you talked a couple different things there. So the one thing, so when you say heart condition, like immediately, you gave the example of someone who's starting, playing in the game all the time, and then the person on the bench. Now, it attacks our heart condition when the person who's playing in our spot is trying to encourage us as we're sitting the bench.
Yeah.
Right? Now how is that shaking your mindset? You're like, well, you don't understand because you're playing, right? Now we put ourselves back on that island, something that we talked about in the beginning of, you know, when we first started here. But now we put ourselves on that island, right? You don't understand because you're playing and I'm not, and there's a difference. Now that's where it's a really big, you know, it's a huge role for the coaches to play, where those kids on the bench, like, they need a different type of motivation. They don't need to tap into mental toughness. That's not where that needs to come in, because mental toughness, if you got a kid that breaks his arm, he can't tap into mental toughness and all of a sudden his arm's not broken. Right? It's different. It's a different unlock. They don't need mental toughness.
100%.
What they need is coping skills. And that's where that's like uncharted land for a lot of us, is these coping skills, right? You can't always just turn on mental toughness.
Well, at least healthy coping skills.
Correct.
Yeah, there is a lot of people cope in different ways.
Well, and I was going to get into that too with, you know, with unforeseen injuries. Now you have the kid who, okay, I'm injured. Well, how can I get healthier faster? Hello, substance abuse. And then we want to get bigger, faster, stronger all the time, and we want our spot back, or we want this again. We had that expectation where this was going to be our season, and now so not only did our disappointment turn into not meeting our expectation, but now this disappointment holding hands with expectation is now looking for validation. Now we just got to the cherry on top.
And I was going to say before, I always feel like the same thing. It's like that old Navy SEAL quote, right? It's, we don't, when something happens, we don't rise to the occasion. Like, we fall to our level of training. Where if you also look at that, for example, like a culture wise, right? Like, your culture doesn't just like step up. Like, it was already there, right? It was already established. And so I think when you look at that from an identity standpoint, like, first off, if somebody is struggling with not playing, well, they had an identity with playing. That was where their purpose was, right? And that's a foundational, I think, issue from the get-go, is that, hey, like, these are, you know, things that you could be establishing with your players, that, hey, you're a lot more, you as a person, right? And also, too, you as an athlete. Take it all together, right? You're so much more important, and you're so much more valuable than what your stats are on the sheet, our win and loss record. Also, too, if you think that we're here just to win baseball games, like, okay, we're also on a bad foundation just from the get-go. Is like, that is not our purpose. Our sole purpose here is, oh, we're here to win baseball games and win championships. It's like, you're going to have these things that pop up in your culture. Nick Saban's been pretty outspoken in this area of talking about, like, the things that lead to wins. Wins are just a result, right? It's not necessarily, and the same thing too. It's like, hey, when we take care of all these other things and we set a culture in this way, we will win, but it's not the primary focus, and it's not that we're constantly on the get-go. Is like when we're setting out that foundation, it's like, yes, it's not saying that we're not trying to win, right? But at the same time, we got to dial it back and say, because again, this is a problem too, because a lot of coaches have their identity in their win and loss record. A lot of coaches have their identity in the status of what school they're working at. A lot of coaches have these same issues with that. Their coping mechanisms have not also been developed. And also too, especially specifically for males inside the space, because it's been so pushed in where it's a generation after generation after generation of mental toughness, man up, all these other things that we haven't dove and developed these skills to a much higher level, which is again also too, I think, correlated with data when you come back into with really mental illness when it comes into males and men and things that happens from that side, and also suicide rates and all the things that happen within that community. And I think that's why I wanted to make it such an important foundational conversation, is because this is something that every person is going to deal with. Your players, you specifically, maybe something you're dealing with right now as you're really disappointed in one area of your life or another. Right. And again, hopefully this, finds your ears and we can, help in the same way, and maybe help you view it from a different perspective. That sometimes the problem isn't the problem. Right. It's the way you're looking at the problem.
Exactly.
And the perspective, more often than not, it's your perspective and and the foundation that is really off from the get-go. And this is just this disappointment is just bringing awareness that your foundation is off.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and I think, again, take the kid that we were talking about. Take the kid who gets the unforeseen injury and can't play. And like you said, that goes back to that root identity issue. Well, it not only does it go back to that root identity issue, but also the unnecessary expectations that we put on ourselves. And as of recently, I've had a couple different people reach out to me, and we started talking about these unnecessary expectations that we put on ourselves where, well, everyone around me, family, parents, brothers, sisters, whoever, expects me to be this player, expects me to be this person. And now we've tricked ourselves in our head. We think we can't be that because we're injured and we can't identify with our identity. So how can I serve these people I love? Right? And we forget about going back to that foundation. Okay, well, how can I just be a child of God? How can I just be a good human being? How can I work on these fundamental core values that make a good human? Because like you said, the point of sports is not just to win games. The point of sports is to build good humans. The point of sports is to build athleticism and athletes. And there's more to athleticism and athletes than just winning and W's and making shots and hitting home runs and
100%.
And all of that. And I think a lot of parents also rely on sports to enforce more good values. So when we totally take that out of the equation, and now we've removed, okay, well, I don't really need you to be a good sport. I just need you to perform. Well, now what are we teaching our young athletes? Yeah.
Well, and I think that that's a big piece too, is just like, let's just call it what it is that most of the time you're going to lose. So if we got this expectation that everybody's expecting to win, right? And that's your foundation, that it's built on winning. Well, guess what? Majority of the world is losing, right? You're watching social media, you're watching everybody's highlight tapes, and you think everybody's winning, right? It's the devil's lie, right? By yourself. You're the only one that's losing. You're the only one that's hurt. You're the only one that's not doing what you look. I'm looking around, and everybody's doing everything they would like to do, and they're achieving all these other things. And I see them, setting all those goals, and I'm the problem, right? And again, not to say that there isn't things that you can work on and things like that as well, but our minds do a really interesting thing there, where again we'll look at everyone that meets that story in our head, right? And we'll pull them into that area rather than again with that's all rooted from a cracked foundation, right? And so I think the same thing there is, and again, and I say this as me personally, like this is something that again I had to learn, because I placed a lot of my value in, and also too, I think this is the other part of it is a lot of times when we look around at a lot of people that are great at a lot of things, and me and you talked about this the other day, is that there's a lot of athletes that really struggle, that achieved really high levels, or even in let's say it's business, let's say take it outside of sports, high achievers just in general. A lot of high achievers have some strong issues with mental illness, right? And that's actually why they achieve so much that they do, is because they're motivated by traumas. They're motivated by trying to chase this identity issue that they have of status or whatever this is. And so that's why I said this, I think quite a few podcasts back, but is that same thing as like when I was talking with God that one day, and I was talking about like the mama mentality and all those things, right? And it's like, again, God being like, did I call you to be like Kobe, or did I call you to be like Christ, right? And then I think that that's the same thing too, is like everybody, when you start to value the status of an athlete or being a high performer or where you want to be or whatever that is, you start to value that much more than all these other things in your life that should be much more important. And again, me personally, it's faith, right? And also, putting God first and all those other things, that you're putting yourself first, and you're putting other people first, or their expectations, or all those other things, is like when that gets out of whack, right? Then we really start to struggle. And again, like, let's say you even look at, for example, like you even look at some of the best performers that ever, or best high achievers, like some of these people that have had great levels of success, is, okay, let's say, again, for example, like, let's say you're Michael Jordan. Let's say you're those guys. Like, again, I viewed Michael Jordan's documentary, I feel like, very differently than a lot of people. Because when I watch Michael Jordan, like, talk about, like, he was great. Like, undoubtedly amazing at basketball. Undoubtedly. Like, again, if not the best, like, top 3, whatever, right? You want to throw in that argument, right? But, like, along with it, when I was listening to him talk, and I'm listening to his mentality and what he's thinking about and all these other things, I'm also seeing a lot of trauma, right? I'm also seeing a lot of mental illness that he's been dealing through. And even now he's not playing, right? And he had issues with relationships his entire career, and him, Kobe, we'll see maybe when LeBron's over, and there's other documentaries and things that come out too, but him and Kobe in the same way, like, a lot of people had a really hard time being around them. And I think it gets coined off as this, well, when you're a high achiever, other people, they don't understand you, and there's all these other things, and it's like, okay, well, hold on. Pause, right? Is that it doesn't need to be that way, and that gets painted as this whole thing of being like, that's normal, like, it's lonely at the top, it's all these other things that gets preached in that same way. And not to say that, like, I get it, like, you're definitely going to be different from other people, but at the same time, if we struggle to develop and maintain and navigate through personal relationships, and also too, as a leader, if you struggle to relate with your players, it's really hard to lead. And again, like, the same thing, relationships, and I feel like this, and this is just personally, again, from my faith in the same way, it's like, why are we even here? Is I think when you get back to that root thoughts, there is like, the relationships that we have with other human beings is one of the top reasons that we're even on earth, right? And when we throw that away, and we know what, we've been hurt so many times, and we've had disappointments, setbacks, all these other things so many different times, and we become hardened in that way, and we're no longer prioritizing relationships, and we're no longer, like, it's not even of interest to us, and if they happen, they happen, and whatever, if I lose a person, whatever, I don't care. It's like all these things, right? You go into a really dark place, and again, you also see that where, again, some of these guys that it's notable, obviously, in the same way of, we had Bianca on the podcast a while back ago, where she's saying the same thing too, is like, there are some people that were really high level achievers that achieve some greatness that, again, like, deal with mental illness issues. And, again, it all comes back to identity there, and where they're excellent in one area of their lives, or you're in business, or you're the coach of, one of the top, comedians, one of the top coaches, one of the top, CEOs, whatever that is, right? But personally, they're struggling, right? And on the field, they're an animal, but off the field, like, they're an animal still, but not in good ways, right? And they have some issues and things that they struggle with. And again, I think that also leads to a deeper part of the conversation too, where a lot of people too have a problem turning back from that, because they feel like they have to be that so that they can perform at the high level that they can perform at, which I think is also, again, a lot to unpack from those though, too.
Well, and then we also get to the point of where we feel like the point of no return,
Yeah.
right? Like I've been doing this for so long
Yeah.
that if I try to do it any other way,
Yeah.
it might not work.
Yeah.
If I suddenly get to a point where I
sure.
try to change, my behavior or my personality or
Yeah.
my work ethic,
For sure.
maybe it won't work,
Yeah.
right? Where on the other end of that can be a huge overcorrection,
Yeah.
right? And even if you go back to the Bible again, we pull out just a simple sentence, and I tweeted it last week or something. God commanded us to love one another.
Yeah.
He commanded us to love one another and love ourselves, right? God is love. Simple.
Yeah.
3 words, love.
Yeah.
Now, again, if we're dissecting that, is love and loving ourselves and loving others, is that self-doubt? Is that not appreciating our work, whether it be a lot or a little, and it doesn't need to be a lot all the time? Are we actually, treating our bodies like the miracle that they are? This is like a walking vessel that God has given us, and not all the time do we appreciate it and take care of it. Are we being kind to others? Are we being a good teammate? Do we have good sportsmanship? Are we telling that guy, oh, you suck, that was a bad play, why did you do that? Is that love? And when you really just take that one sentence and try to look at your actions and actually take every single thing from the moment you step on the field, are you playing with love? Are you being a loving teammate? Are you being a loving coach?
Yeah.
Is there any point on the field where you don't feel like you're being loved or being loved?
Yeah.
And how do we get into that? And how do we correct that without being the overcorrector and, well, I'm not going to get this, so I'm going to quit the team?
Well, I think that's the other thing, too, is there's a lot of people that think that, for example, they see love as soft.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Well, I can't compete with love.
Right.
Right? Well, that's actually opposite. That's a society's definition of like what love is. They think it's like you're a pushover, you're passive, you're all these other things that people can just run all over you.
And I would argue that's the overcorrection.
Yeah,
right there.
well, and I would also say it's a misdirection of understanding and misunderstanding of what love is. Love is accountable.
Right.
I used to tell my players all the time, I hold you accountable because I love you.
100%.
Right? I'm strong with you because I love you. I set strong boundaries with you because I love you.
Yeah.
I come to you with correction because I love you. I play hard against you as an opponent because I love you. And again, by us playing hard, we're going to make each other better. Right? I'm competing in that same way. Love is an energy source, not a... just you're going to run all over me and all these other things. And again, you look at I think that the same way too is that a lot of times, let's say you go biblically and look in the same way. If you actually read the Bible and you think that like Jesus was out just like hugging everybody and making everybody feel good, that was not what was happening.
Yeah, right.
He was making a lot of people feel very uncomfortable, and he was challenging a lot of people to the point that obviously, they threw him on a cross and killed him, right? That they made him that he was making them that upset, right? So I just think on the same way is that when you look at that, is that when we, from a society view, when we view love, we do see some of it. Right, we see like an half complete image of love, where we see like some of the fruits of the spirit. Right, where you see those, gentleness and kindness, and you go into that, mercy and grace, and yes, for sure. But also too, on the same side of that, love is a lot of other things as well, and you can understand that as a parent, right? Like sometimes I'm telling my kid no. Right, and when I'm telling them no, it's not because I don't love them, or when I send them to boarding school or something like that, or they've been struggling in these areas, and I've had to make these, I've had to set these things in place, and I've had to. Let's say you went into, or again, like how to get them with a therapist, right? And they don't want to go to the therapist, but I'm making them go anyways, or whatever that is. Like, look, that isn't always making people. They might not even understand that we're really loving them in those moments, and we got to see past. There's a deeper level of love there than the surface level. Everything's acceptable, and you can just run all over me. Now, the other part of that I think as well is it's like that lies. The same thing as well is like, first off, if you're worried that your performance right? You're more worried about your performance than you're worried about your mental health. You need to reestablish that hierarchy. Red flag, right? Well, maybe I won't perform as high. I was like, okay, well, is that the point of what we're talking about? Is that your performance, or are we talking about your life? Right? Or do you care about your performance more than you care about yourself? Because again, and that's where you're finding your value. That's a deeper conversation that we need to have from the get-go, that of what you're prioritizing. And I think that, again, for me in that same way, is just like, hey, like I remember, like I mentioned a couple times, is like when I was in high school, I had to play very angry when I played, right? Because that's how I could perform. Now, but that was a Band-Aid, right? For root issues and things that I was having going on. And so I couldn't play another way that I knew of, right? I didn't know another energy source or a fuel source or a foundation that I could play from, because I've never experienced that before, right? And so I had to learn how to play from this other place. Where then when I got into college, right, like I said, I got to get to a point where I could play and have fun, and my main goal was having fun and prioritizing the relationships with my teammates and doing all those things, and it really changed how I played. And again, I would say the opposite way is that when I played angry, it led to a lot of other places. And like when I went home, like I was still angry, I was still upset, and I was still resentful, and I was still all these other places. And so I think when you look into that, when you go into performance, of being like, okay, well, what is performance? Because this other thing is like, when it bled into all these other areas, it's like, yo, I was also cloudy as a player because I was playing angry, that again, it had nasty byproducts of what came with it, which then therefore limited overall my performance, because I couldn't process disappointment, right? Because it was just, every time something would happen, every setback, these other things, everybody's against me against the world, all, that type of hustle mentality, this me against everybody mentality, led to so many other areas that led to that. When I played angry and all those things, I got a little bit of performance, right? And I can feel that performance increase. The problem is that there's a plateau there. Right. It can only get me so much success, right? And really, the lie that's been planted there is that my performance is going to be lesser. Yeah, maybe in the short term, possibly, when you don't know how to, again, maybe you overcorrected slightly, and again, you haven't seen, you don't know how to run in this way, and how to, again, okay, I'm dealing with these things with love, and I think that means not holding people accountable, or I think that means not having hard conversations, or always patting everybody on the butt and doing those things. Like, when you've overcorrected in that way, and you've actually misapplied the concepts, and that, when you're reestablishing your foundation, sure, okay, but overall, the truth behind that lie is that my performance actually will excel far more, right, when I'm rooted and have a fuel source in the right area, and going from a stronger foundation. We got to remember, stronger foundation, bigger building. And you know what? We might have to tear down the building to fix the foundation, and maybe that means my performance and my status is lost for a half a second. But I'm telling you, when that building gets built back, it will be the way taller building, and we can go way higher. And so, like, not to get stuck in that And that's when we look at patterns in general. Anytime you disrupt somebody's foundation, well, yes, guess what? Like, there's a building built on top of that, right? There's going to be some unsteadiness there for a minute. But also, too, when you refine that process, and it doesn't have to happen all at once, right? For example, and I'm going to bring actually an engineering standpoint in this way, is that let's say they built a skyscraper, 50 years ago or something like that. I don't know the price range. Anyways, they continually go down underneath the ground, and they make adjustments to the foundation, right? They're making sure, one, maintenance-wise, it's not rusting, all these other things. They have to do this with bridges and things too, right? Like this older architecture. Like, they got to make sure that, again, foundationally it stays strong, but also on top of that, right? That foundation starts to shift. Things start to happen. Again, even here locally, there's, I don't know, hopefully this is true, but I remember that for the Luxor, for example, they're saying like every year it would go into the ground like another inch. And there was a foundational issue that they had to address, that the actual casino was sinking into the ground.
Interesting.
Right? And so they had all these theories about why, and all these things. But in any case, like, it was a foundational issue, and they had to go through and And actually, then they have to reestablish this foundation. Now, again, you don't always have to tear down the building to adjust the foundation and continue to support the foundation. We could add other support structures, take out pieces. Again, we could put other support structures in, take out a piece, rebuild this X, Y, and Z. It doesn't have to be a complete dismantle to add and continue to develop in that same way. And I think that's, again, attacking that root lie from the get-go is that you think that you're like, oh man, I'm gonna perform slightly less. You know what? Like, again, let's just be honest, right? Some weekends, some years, some all those things, sometimes you're not performing well because, again, you playing angry, you're playing in that same way. It's not, what are you batting 1,000?
Right.
You batting 1,000, hitting every time you're up hitting a home run?
Right.
Right. So what are we, again, let's get rid of the select lie in the very beginning and say, hey, I am investing in myself. And also when I'm a better person, right, I'm going to be my best, right? And being my best, and, again, on the same way, and also from a hierarchy standpoint, again, if you're valuing your on-field performance more than you are you as a human, well, that's another thing that we have to actually talk about, because maybe that's why you're sitting there running in circles and why you're having the same issues pop up in your life over and over and over again, running in these loops, is because that hierarchy is broken in your head. And until you fix that foundational issue, you're going to be making decisions from a broken foundation. And when you're making decisions from a broken foundation, you're not going to be able to move forward.
Right.
You're going to keep making the same decisions over and over again because it's rooted from a place of more important to me than all these things is status. Okay, well, if you have a status problem and that's where you feel like your identity comes from, well, then you're going to be making a lot of decisions out of the wrong place. And where you're basing your foundation is going to be problematic.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, I mean, you experienced a lot of foundational earthquakes in your college career, right? You did face injury. You did experience loss. You did experience, relationship things. You were away from home. You had to reestablish a support system. You also got to a point where you weren't contributing on the field, but you were taking stats. Now, I'm interested and I know because we've been friends for over a decade now, but I would like for you to share some of those moments, because I think those moments are super valuable to, especially a lot of our younger players and even professional guys. I mean, our pro guys and pro athletes and D1 athletes are also dealing with breakups, loss. I'm not being used the way I thought I would be used. Maybe you were a shortstop and now you play outfield. Well, did your identity just get shaken and all those different things? I think I have the luxury of getting to see you perform through all those things. But also as a human, what was happening to you as a human? And then separately as a player when you experienced all of those things.
No, I mean, I think there's a lot of those things. And I think also, too, I feel like I'm a much higher performer now because of my foundation, with God, even with things that just happened, like, even last week. Like, if I didn't have God, there's no way that I can perform to the levels that I'm able to perform from because of the foundation that I know that I have. And so I think that's the same thing as, like, when you go back then, I think a lot of it, too, was built off of my foundation of just morals from the get-go, right? Which were biblical principles, but not presented to me that way. Like, when I was younger, just with my dad and, like, what some of the things that he'd push in is, like, it's from a moral standpoint. I think generally, like, I've always been someone that's like, I'm not going to just sit here. I'm not going to just sit here and be unhappy. Like, I'm not going to just sit here and be miserable my whole life. Like, I'm not going to sit here like, in the same way. I don't feel like in that same way. And I think also at the time, right, being truthful in the same way is that I think what got me through college was actually two conflicting traumas. Now, when I look back, so I did have, and I still dealt with it afterwards, was if you looked at that hierarchy, right, of where I was making that foundation and those decisions from, is that status was a big thing to me. It was important. I found identity in it, right, because I didn't have it when I was younger, right, and so because of that, foundationally cracked, I think that, again, I was searching after status, that being a star player, the shortstop, all those other things were really important to me, and again, I would even from how I dressed, right? For example, like in the same way, like as a player, like I remember my junior college coach always asking me, he's like, why do you always got to go out there looking like an MLB player? Because I always had all the things that made me look those ways, right? But like at the same time, that was a rooted foundational thing underneath that was acceptance, right? So more important than status was acceptance. And that acceptance mindset on that same way was even more important. So for me, when I did go through those hardships and those things that happened, well, more important than the status was the acceptance. And I think I defaulted into that. Okay, well, how do I help? Because I also want the team, you know, to appreciate me, to love me, to all these other things. So I was still trying to serve, right? And that's what I also think that people sometimes get mixed up, that like just because people do certain actions, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's rooted in a great foundational place. They may be very. I think my foundation there was still, not that anybody's foundation is perfect, right? But I think my foundation there was still really cracked, and I was doing things that were very helpful to a lot of people, even though I was broken, right? Even though I was hurting, even though I was, struggling, right? That I was doing these other things that it just happened to express itself in a healthier way, I guess I would say, in that same way. But I think in the same scenarios is like, again, like I did lose my dad while I was in college, my sophomore year in college. I did, again, have breakups and, things like that happen. I did have, girlfriends, cheating on me with my best friends, or I did have, I did go to culture shocks and go places, and also not only culturally be really thrown off, but also on top of that too, get thrown up into backup roles when I've gone from teams where I was the man, and all of a sudden, I'm now on the backup guy, and the team might not even notice if I didn't show up for the bus. I've had those things, right? And so I think more so from that is like what got me through was definitely my desire. I still had that desire in me to like help other people and to serve in those ways. But I think it was more rooted from an acceptance standpoint, where I think that still needed to get refined later on. And I think I'm a higher performer now than I've ever been. I think I'm the highest performance I've ever been in now. But that's also too because I've done so much work on my foundation. And so, like, for example, for you guys, like, just being vulnerable just from like last week, right? Like, so what was it, Friday? Yeah. Yeah, Friday. So Friday, for example, like, in the mid morning, right? We got a whole bunch of people coming in. Cody just got back in town. All the things our day was like loaded. Been a long week. I was covering a bunch of different training we had that was going on. And again, I'm sure you guys can all identify with like trying to cover for everybody, or again, had them cover somebody else's shifts, working doubles, X, Y, and Z. Triples at times. But also along with that is just going, okay, on that Friday, like last Friday, like I had lost, my Nana passed away, and she had a stroke on Christmas, middle of the day. We were trying to get flights for my mom to get out to see her. Flights was crazy. Southwest, had the whole meltdown. One-way flights are $1,200, to travel an hour on the plane, or a couple hours on the plane, I guess. But in any case, as she stepped onto the plane, like my Nana passed away. So my mom called me, and we were talking on the phone, and I'm like kind of in a hurry because I got a whole bunch of clients coming in, but also too, I know my Nana's sick, so I'm picking up the phone every time she calls me just to make sure, everything's going on. And she starts kind of casual, and and I'm like, hey, like I got clients coming in, like, just give you a heads up, like, what's going on. She's like, well, I got here and I'm on the plane, but it wasn't soon enough. And then she told me that, my Nana had passed away. And so when that happened, the same thing too is obviously the same thing, right? Like, Tay, like, again, like went in your office, like cried for a minute, try to semi-collect myself. I had players coming in and things like that. So then also going into the office, and immediately, my new foundation on the same way is that like I was drawn to is like, I want to worship, I want to be with God. I want him to heal me. I want to let him into where like I'm feeling pain, right? I'm hurting. Obviously, my Nana meant a lot to me, like all these things. Like, I don't want to make it, sometimes I think because God can be so there and he's so healing, and my support system is so strong with him now that it can come off like, it's almost like, well, man, if I was talking about this, like I'd be destroyed right now. And I'm like, I would have too. Like, but I think that even now, like I've spent a lot of time with God, even just this last weekend, and letting him into those areas where it doesn't grow into resentment, that it doesn't grow into pain, that it doesn't grow into how I'm interacting with other people. And so, like, for the example, like I go back in my office, I'm worshiping, with God, spending my alone time, letting myself feel those feelings and be with them. And I'm like trying to pull it together because we have, I know there's a lot of people that are, depending on me in that situation, in the sense of, players that this is their last session and they're going back to school, right? And everything's come to the session. I'm like, okay, hey, like I got to pull it together. I got to perform, right? It's game day, right? I got to perform. And so anyways, how I know to perform now is with God. Like he's going to be my strength. He's going to be my emotional support. He can coach them for me. He can make the words I say be useful. He can use everything for good. And so I think the same way is like for 45 minutes, for an hour, I was trying to pull myself like together. Players show up, walk out there. I'm still trying to pull it together. And then I just called it out, right? I just told, it was Paige at the time. She plays for Oregon. She's their shortstop. And I just, looked at Paige and I was just like, hey, I just want to get this out of the way. Like my Nana just passed away, and I start crying, of course. And I'm like, I'm trying to pull it together. I've been trying to pull it together. Just want you to know before we get into it, I'm going to give you my best. I'm going to give you everything I got. And we ended up having a really good session, and it actually was really good. But again, along with that is like, if that would have been years ago, it probably would have, again, there would have been anger. There would have been all these other things. And I even had, people reach out to me and like they're almost like offering me these like angry expressions of feelings, right? Like they're like, hey, like you could, like you got a bat, or you want to go hit some things, or, like what, like if you like, but I'm like, I never felt like that. Right? If anything, I was in there when I was worshiping and I was spending my time with God, like I was talking to God about, like I was telling him how grateful I was for the time I got to spend with her. And then I asked in the same way as like, and again, I hope you guys can hear it from the same side as, my relationship with God, as I just said, God, like, let me feel how much she loves me, and then so like letting all of that in all at once, and that's really healing. Like love is very healing. And so I think the same thing when I was spending my time doing so, it's like, well, then I also had other athletes and other things we had to get done today, and we had to make all these decisions and all these things. And if I had a cracked foundation, or I had no support in that same way, or I think how people try to get to there is what they do is they try to get there from an altered route of pushing their feelings to the side and denial, and being like, well, I'll handle this later. And they're just shoving it underneath the rug because they're trying to get to the performance side, right? They're trying to get to what I was able to do.
Yeah, I'll deal with this later.
Yeah, I'll deal with this later, and I got things to do, and I'm going to shove this underneath the rug. And so for me, in the same way, I was like, no, I'm going to let myself feel it, but I have a select time that I need to feel it now, and then later we're going to go back and revisit because I know it's not gone, right? And also on top of that too, me being like, I'm not relying on my strength. I'm not acting like everything is okay. Because it's not okay, right. And I'm being transparent with where I'm at, and then I'm giving it over to God, and then asking God to do what I can't do right now. And so I think the same thing is like we might have got to the same level of performance for that one session or something like that, right? By going those two different routes, like one shoving everything underneath the rug, or me giving everything to God, right? Everybody's trying to create a Band-Aid or a compensation to get back to the same level of performance, but for me, in that same way, it was, hey, like, God, more than all of this, more than everything, here in the same way, is that, my relationship with God is higher than all of those things. And so I think the same thing is like, yeah, the session's important, but in the hierarchy, there's other things that are more important. Right. And so, and I think also too, along with that, right, like the support systems too, of like people that God's put around me, like, you told me like 4 times, like, hey, you can go home. Like, you're good. We'll figure it out. Like Cody's here, like we can cover for you. Like we have a team, we can do these things. And if that needed to happen, like we would be okay too. But, again, I felt like in the same way is that in that processing for me within my foundation, right. And this doesn't have to be like, my relationship with God is not going to be your relationship with God. Right. It's unique. It's also developed and different at different points in time. My relationship with God 2 years ago, my relationship now are very different. Also too, on top of that too, again, like, I'm not here on the same way. I'm not trying to convince you that you need to have a foundation with God or that it needs to look like mine or any of those things. I'm just telling you my relationship and how I process, things now in the same way is that I see, and again, when I'm learning more and more, is that all of these things and everything that has happened is spiritual to me. And so when I pull into those things of it being spiritual, I deal with my things. If the attack is spiritual, I'm going to fight it spiritually. And I think it's the same way. I'm going to go the same way back is that I'm constantly giving that back to God. And where I think is like with that is one thing I like to hand over is like, again, like when I was in high school, like I was an atheist, right? Like I didn't handle things that way. When I was in college, like I didn't have that relationship. I didn't handle things that way.
Right.
And there's byproducts of handling things other ways. And again, with my relationship in those same ways is this is a different power that I didn't have before. And one thing I would like to say it the same way is there's a lot of things that like to give off the appearance that it has the same power, right? And I think, like, again, if you take it from a biblical viewpoint, is like the devil loves to impersonate God, and likes to have all these Band-Aids and go any other way than, to give it to God, right? But the problem is, I think in the same way, is that for me, when I tapped in to having that foundation with God, it's abundantly a different power source. And so I think it's that lie, right? It's that lie of if I deal with things this way and we go about doing it this way, or if I just sweep this underneath the rug and, things happen and it is what it is and all those things, and you have these unprocessed feelings of grief or unprocessed feelings of resentment or whatever that is, right? It doesn't go anywhere. Like to use your example, right? It's like dirty laundry, right? Like it's not going anywhere, right? Like if you keep throwing laundry to the side, like you got to deal with your laundry at some point, right? And your house is just filled with laundry of things you haven't unpacked. And the longer you go, the longer it's going to take to unpack it. Where this could be a daily thing, right? It should be. And where I'm getting to the same thing too. It's like it's not. God isn't something we're not shaped by what we occasionally do. It's but by what we constantly do.
Yes.
Right. So if I occasionally let God into places, if I occasionally have that relationship with Him, I'm going to get occasional results. Right. Rather than like I'm having conversations with Him all day. Right. I'm having my life with Him all day. He's involved in every decision. He's involved with all of these things that are happening. And again, it's more of a mindset where it's like I'm learning more and more because I so often want to lean into my own understanding. I so often want to lean into my own decision making, but my decision making is faulty, right? Like it's my human, it's my ego, it's my I'm trusting myself like I'm all knowledgeable, right? Or that I'm, I'm trusting my team like we're all knowledgeable, right? When in reality, like I have a source that I can tap into that, I might not understand why, God has asked me to do this or asked me to respond this way or, asked me those things in the moment. But again, I've had enough experience with God at this point that, again, the more that I'm obedient or the more that I lean into Him, it's like a great leader in the same way, right? We can all identify with a great coach. Maybe it was your dad. Maybe it was your grandmother, maybe it was, whatever that was, somebody that mentored in your life. Maybe it was just a mentor or somebody that your friend, whatever that is. When they've given you advice, right, and they've done it so many times, and it's helped so many times, right? Like just like great leadership, like when Nick Saban says we're going to run this play, like his players trust him because of his experience, right? And that he's again with his experience what he can do for them, right? In the same way. And like I feel like God to me and my relationship with Him is that He's the ultimate source. So when I say the same thing too, it's like He never lead me astray. He'll never lie to me. He'll never do these other things, right? So the deeper I get the relationship with Him, I can identify His voice. And also, again, like I said, from a foundational standpoint, when I start making decisions from there and leaning into that, that is a much different foundation than I had when I was playing, and also one that I really wish I had when I was playing because it would have gave me so much more stability, where I'm not on a roller coaster of the ups and downs and to do all those things. And even as a player, like where I made it through because I'm like leaning onto another trauma and like to counter and a Band-Aid to get myself through. Again, when I got done playing for 2 years, I wanted nothing to do with baseball.
Right.
There was resentment that had been built up right? There's all of that byproducts of all of those things that I had done from that faulty foundation. And so, like, as a coach in the same way, it's like, well, if I want, you just think about this as a player, like, well, if I want my players to have the ultimate performance, right, which is, again, along with it, if that's important to you, right, and somewhere within your hierarchy, right, well, like, the same thing, like, I want to help them with their foundation, right, because that's where they're going to be basing their decisions from, and that's also, too, how they're going to be able to filter, you know, things in their lives and decisions that they're going to make, and also setbacks and disappointments and things like that as well, to keep them, because there's going to be storms, there's going to be noise, there's going to be all these distractions that come in, and how do you navigate through that with wisdom and discernment, you know, through those processes. And I think, again, the more faulty your foundation is, like, it's going to be exposed. And we talk about that with our hitters all the time. It's like, hey, it's like a leaking pipe, right? You're always leaking, but you put pressure on the pipe, you see where it sprays.
Right.
So when those situations come up, you see where your holes are, right, in your foundation, and where you need to get repairs. And I think the same way is, like, again, along with that, is instead of trying to push hardship away, and trying to push disappointment away. And I think that's the other thing, when you kind of like a nugget there, pulling back from disappointment there, is that you can't avoid disappointment.
Right.
You can't avoid hardship. You can't do, you know, like, these things are going to happen. And just because, for example, again, I used to think too that I'm walking with God. Oh, I'm walking with God. That means that, you know, my life's going to be, I'm not going to go through hard things. Like, no. I'm still going to go through every hard thing. Right, I'm still going to go through all these things, storms, whatever God has for me, and also too, like, the deeper my foundation is with Him, like, He might put me through more things, because what He needs me to do is, on the same side, is I have to build the character. I have to build. He's building me to prepare me for what He's walking me into, and so instead of pushing hardship away, I understand that in those moments that He's teaching me something, He's bringing awareness to me on something. And almost like a coach in the same way, it's like, hey, when we're doing hard things, it's to expose cracks in our foundation or areas that we're struggling, so that we can build here and become better, right? And I think that that's the, you know, bigger pieces that I've, you know, like, instead of trying to push those things away, is understand that this is where we're at, and to use those. They're the source. Like, I'm not a good coach because I've never failed, right? Like, the reason I'm knowledgeable is because I failed more than you've tried, right? And so instead of looking for a coach that is like, oh, like, they put on this facade that everything is great and all their players are, you know, all these positive things are happening, it's like, no. I qualify to be a coach at this level because I've messed up so many athletes. I've made so many mistakes. I've failed over and over and over and over again. And that's why I can help you. Not because I haven't failed. I don't want someone to help me that has never failed, right? In the sense of, as a human, right? In that same way, because I have failed, because I have made these mistakes, that is what experience is.
Yeah.
Right? Is that I've learned from these things, and now I'm trying to help you with the learning curve, so that you don't walk down those same paths. So instead of me, it's not this facade that everything's perfect. It's like, no. I want to point out everywhere where that I failed. And again, I think from a coach in the same point, on a vulnerability standpoint, as a coach, I think sometimes, a lot of times, we like to put on that facade that everything is, that you're supposed to have it figured out, and I got it figured out, and all these other things, when in reality, I always tell them the same thing. It's like, hey, like, I'm talking to them, and a lot of things I'm talking to players about too. I'm like, hey, me too. I even talk about this with hitting. Right? I'm like, hey, I get that. I do this too. I like to push and yank with my back. This is where I'm strong. This is what I like to do. But let me tell you why this doesn't work. Let me tell you why I couldn't hit in college. Let me tell you why I started to struggle in these other areas. Let me tell you why I struggle now. Right? And this is where, let me point you in these other directions too, of that, in that help, rather than, I think, as a younger coach, and more when I was novice, is that I was trying to appear like I knew all these answers, and I did all these other things, and I knew all this stuff, right? And that you could trust me because look at how successful I've been in X, Y, and Z. Okay, hey, like, more often than not, especially when, like, I used to tell this to one of our old instructors when I was training him. One of the things I said to him, I said, you know why what you need to do is, like, the problem is, and the reason that you're struggling is, like, you haven't messed up enough athletes. Like, you're just regurgitating. you're regurgitating information. I know it in my heart because I messed that up. I have conviction, right? The reason that when I say it to a player, they're like, and they lock in, is they can feel my conviction. But the reason I have conviction is because I failed. You haven't failed. You just listened to what I said and then went and deployed it. I've actually done it. I made all the mistakes. And also, too, when new ideas pop in, I can filter them because I've already walked down that avenue before. You're just doing what I told you to do, but when the new idea comes up and I've already ran down that path and you don't have that experience, you're going to run down that path. I'm not, because I've already experienced that. I've already been through that. I've already struggled with that.
Right.
So I can help you navigate through these times rather than someone that is just regurgitating. So I think that that's the other thing as a coach in the same way is like, I'm not standing in front of you as like someone that's unscathed. Like, I have scars because I've been through battle. Like, I have ripped clothes because I've been through war. I've been through those other things. So when I talk to you as an athlete, you listen to me differently than someone that's regurgitating everything that I'm saying, because I'm going to say it with, you're going to hear my passion. You're going to hear my conviction. You're going to hear my pain. Right. And so because of that, we connect. Right. So you could be telling them the same exact thing that I'm telling them, but it's not going to connect the same. You're not going to get the results that I'm going to get. You're not going to be able to battle back. You're not going to be able to answer the questions when they start going, why, or they try to do something else and I tell them what this is going to lead to and the things they're going to struggle with. Because again, I know it on all those things because I failed. Because of the hardship, I'm strong.
Right.
Not in spite of.
Right.
Right. And that's a very different mentality. And that's why, like, as a younger coach and you start coming up and you start to try to appear like a wiser coach and these other things, the problem is you're trying to get to the destination without going the path. The path is you got to fail.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You're not going to have my conviction. You're not going to have my passion if you don't go through what I had to go through. Not necessarily that you need to do everything I've done, but again, you need to experience hardship. You need to walk into the storm. You can't just keep trying to avoid it and go the other way and have all these, phenomenal things and go to the easy path and go, I'm going to go this way. Like, no. The struggle is what develops your character. The struggle is what develops you into actually the great coach. Right? So instead of wanting it like, well, if you just tell me which way to go, and it's like, no, but that's why I know which way to go. Right? Like, that's why I'm teaching you to fish. Right? I could just tell you where the fish is and do these other things, but now what happens when the one day there isn't fish there and then you start going all over the ocean looking for the fish?
Right.
When in reality, like, again, the same reason is I don't go look all those other places because I've already been there. And I know the downfalls of all those.
Well, and we mess that up as humans, right? That's the myth, is confidence is not built in winning. Confidence is built in experience.
Yeah.
Just because you have the experience doesn't always mean you're going to win and there's going to be success there.
Yeah.
Confidence is built in experience and experience only. And then we ran past a couple other things there that I wanted to circle back to, but the three things that you did or didn't do was acknowledge your feelings when hardship comes, or when a disappointment comes, or when any type of struggle comes. Acknowledge your feelings or lack thereof.
Yeah.
What are your true feelings? What are you actually feeling? So the what and then the why. Why are you feeling those feelings?
Yeah.
And then the who can you talk to? And I wanted to circle back to those because those were three things that actually I had also talked about with my therapist a couple sessions back, where because the why, the what, and the who comes up so often in daily performance in all areas, when we ignore the what, the why, and the who, we're not acknowledging our feelings, we're not deciphering what our true feelings are, and we're not talking to anyone about them. Well, now we're in a really tough spot.
Yeah.
But like you said, you had an hour, you got yourself together, did what you needed to do in that hour, acknowledge your feelings, decide what your true feelings were, and then talk to God about it.
Yeah.
And if you're not talking to God, you better talk to somebody else.
Yeah.
Talk to whoever's nearby.
For sure.
But you did those three things, and as a human, and not only as a human, but also as a male, you honed in on that. And you gave the human you all of that acknowledgement and self-love, and you gave that love back to God and asked for him to also show you love in return.
Yeah.
And that itself is huge in our whole topic of today's podcast, disappointment,
Yeah.
is tackling the what, the why, and the who can I talk to.
Yeah. And then it literally, like you're saying too, is like, again, and to get to all of those
Mm-hmm.
is the first one is, like you said, is the awareness of
Yep.
I do, the humility there of that understanding of that I do need to have the humility to know that I do need a who. I do need to talk to someone. I do have a problem,
Yes.
right? And that's the thing, again, as a male, the same way as well, is
Well, let's take this silly idea that we created over time. You know what? You might go out there and cry. Are you going to be embarrassed because you're a guy and you're a coach and you're going out there to work? No, you acknowledged it and you, again, owned the human in you and said, hey, you know what? This is what's going on with me, so I might get emotional. And you did. And then, but like you said, after that acknowledgement, you had a great session. Had you ignored all those feelings, had you not acknowledged that, had you been trying to push your tears away for an entire session, I guarantee you that would have been a lot different experience.
yeah. No, and I think that that's the same thing there is like from like literally what you're saying, the same thing is like one thing that I would like to push in to, like, I say this all the time with like men, like not knowing how to be a man is the same thing as well, is like you have the perfect example of how to be a man. Like read the Bible. Like Jesus is the perfect example of how to be a man. Like you thinking you can't weep or you can't cry or you can't admit that you have faults or these other things, like that's not you. Like being a man is humility, right? Like, and also too is understanding like where you've made mistakes and things like along with it is like, hey, like I'm struggling like in the same thing in this in these areas, and then again when I struggle in that area, like I can admit and then take into those resources and actually do those things. You get what I'm saying? And like go through those processes, because I know a lot of people too, again, especially men, are listening to what you're saying there, right? But they've been programmed where it's like, that's weak, right? I got things to do.
Right.
I don't have time for this.
Right.
I got blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Right? But again, with that same tone is like, when you say that, it's like, yo,
Ignore the human. Ignore the human.
yeah.
Ignore
and,
the human.
And again, that's your ego. It's arrogance, right? You think that you're bigger. You're bigger than these things. That you don't do these things yet. You're popping off on your wife. Yet you're popping off on your players. Yet you don't have patience. Yet at night, and again, you're waking up and you're feeling like you can't. You feel like there's a 1,000,000-pound weight on your shoulders when you wake up in the morning as a man. And also, too, on top of that you feel like you have so much pressure and everybody's depending on you and all these other things. And at any moment,
unnecessary expectation.
right, all these things are building up, right? But there isn't a problem. Is there not a problem? There's a problem.
Right.
You have a problem, right? And again, along with that, it takes humility to sit down with a therapist. It takes humility to reach out for help. It takes humility to admit that there's a problem in the first place before you do any of these things, and also to admit that you're the problem,
Right.
right? And again, as a leader and as a man, it doesn't matter in any capacity in the same way, is that like 90% of the time you are the problem, right? 10% is what's happening to us, right? And the other 90% is how we respond, right?
Yeah.
Well, how we respond is us.
Right.
I'm the problem,
Right.
right? So the issue is the same in the same way, is that if you just walk into that and say, hey, look, like I have these problems. I don't want to live my life this way. I don't want to feel this way anymore. I don't want to have these things happen anymore. Again, like you first got to acknowledge there's a problem.
Right.
So if you walk into it and you're like, again, most men, I don't need that. I'm good. Blah 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 blah. No. Like again, I just wanted to address that. Like, bro, there's a problem.
Yeah.
You struggle. The reason that you don't have any emotional stability is there's a problem, right? And it's not in the moment. The moment is just an expression of the problem.
Well, and we run past the common denominator between us and all of the outside variables.
Yeah.
Right. The common denominator in every outside variable is us.
Yeah.
You can't always fix. You can very slim 1 out of 10 chance. Can you fix the outside variables?
For sure.
But what you can fix is yourself.
Yeah. And that's where it becomes the bigger piece, is like, just like you're saying, is like, okay, again, how I perceive what's going on in the world, and again, my responses to that, those are all things that are controllable, not necessarily in the moment, right? But I can control them earlier on as well, right? Like, again, don't try to rise to the occasion, right? Everything, the world's on fire, right? And that's why I say with a lot of, leaders that I've had as well, is the same thing as like when you go into those leaders is like, they're like, again, put me in the scenario and I'll show you. And it's like, no. Mm-mm. You'd rather be prepared for an opportunity and not have one than have an opportunity and not be prepared. And that also means, again, as you as a leader, is that you have to do your work. You have to do your work prior, so that when you're put in those scenarios that you are ready. Right. And so I think that's that other piece is, again, though, is like getting back to that general relation is just like understanding that from the get-go is like, hey, like there's humility in that same process. And I need to first become humble enough and get over myself and come to the end of myself that I don't have all the answers and that, again, that I do have these problems and I don't want to live my life this way. And once you come to the end of that, like, again, that's like the start of knowledge, right? The recognition of God, that there's things that are bigger than you that you need to recognize as like the beginning of wisdom, right? It's from the same way as that you don't have it together, right? No one has it together. We all do need help.
Well,
we all do
and
need
God
each other.
gave us emotions to feel them, not ignore them.
100%. Yeah, they're not there for no reason. And they're not emotions aren't weakness.
Correct.
Right? Emotions aren't weakness. Oh, you're being emotional. Well, I'm sorry, I'm just hammering men today. But like also on the other end, emotions aren't weakness. And I'm going to put this out too, is, again, you guys want to talk about emotions, like, oh, like, again, they talk about like a female, like, oh, she's being emotional. Bro, you getting angry is an emotion, fool.
Yes.
Like, duh, right? You're being emotional. You popping off is emotional. You, again, not thinking clearly because you're hot-headed is emotional. And mostly in men, it pops up that way. So, again, don't coin it off where like, oh, she's really emotional. So are you. There's just awareness inside of your emotions to understand, hey, right? Again, for me to have emotional stability, right, is that you have these issues too, and they might express themselves in different ways, right? But at the same time, again, along with that, like, all of that is awareness of things that we need to work on, right? And also telltales that we need to do this work, process these things so that I can become a better leader, so I can help more people, and also to be for just myself, like, also have peace, right? And I'll kind of, I think, wrap it up kind of with this one too, is like, peace. I read this just the other day. Peace isn't the absence of issues. It's the presence of someone. Which is, the man, the myth, the legend, Jesus Christ. But yeah, so it's like, again, having peace in the storm, right, is a big place. And you can have peace in the storm when you've done the work prior to the storm coming. Like a skilled captain, right, in storms is not because he rose to the occasion. He's been in many storms before and he's navigated, and he has a skill set that's built for those storms when he goes into them. And so, again, stop avoiding the storms. Like, you'll never get good at navigating storms if you never are trying to avoid them constantly or acting like they don't exist, because that's just not the truth, and they're going to just swallow you. They're just going to swallow you. If you're in the middle of a storm in the middle of the sea and you got 30-foot waves and you're like, nope, they're not happening. It's not happening. Like, you are going down. You start, again, along with it.
I would say that's the person looking for mental toughness when they have a broken arm.
100%. Yeah. Again, there's a problem.
Other things.
Yeah. So, again, along with it, I know that a lot of that too. I'm sorry if I stepped on your toes a little bit, but I mean, it is. I think it's an important thing. Again, it's out of love. There's a lot of strength, and there's a lot of power that comes from your performance when you actually acknowledge these things and walk into them, rather than keep shoving them to the side and then thinking that, and then tricking yourself into thinking that you are that good when you haven't experienced those storms and you haven't learned how to navigate through. I think it's a bigger piece and a bigger conversation that needs to happen a lot more.
Awareness is a superpower. I will say it again. Awareness is a superpower. Unlock it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, one thing I started realizing that we haven't done is
Prayed out.
I haven't been praying us out.
Yeah.
You got to remind me, Tay. You know what I'm saying? You got to let me know sometimes. I haven't been praying us out. All right, so I'm going to pray us out real quick.
All right,
and
let's
we'll get
do
going.
it.
Okay.
Happy New Year, y'all. Let's go.
Happy New Year. Okay. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for bringing us here today, God, and really just inspiring me to have this conversation. God, I just hope that you soften everybody's heart and where they can take in your word here, God, and remove more of me and have more of you in there, God. And that it gets communicated and touches their heart in the way that it's supposed to. We ask for your guidance and your wisdom, God, and help us love and see people like you do, God. And we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Well, from us and all of our friends out there, until next time, Farm System out.